wondering where you are. Hi, Malar. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm still in Malaysia.
Yeah, good for you. So it's March already, huh?
Yeah.
February flew by. See, I can't even pronounce February. February flew by when as we talked about love at work, and it's brought us into March. And March is all about breaking the bias, right? And we thought we would get on that same wave as the International Women's Day and gave us an opportunity to talk about biasness and being unbiased. So we're going to start the month with a little bit of a overview because we've got great people lined up for the next 4 weeks. That's going to help us think through and talk through breaking the bias. Yeah. So Malar and I started the flow with putting out videos about how we broke some of our biases, or who helped us break our bias that we didn't even know we had, our unconscious bias, right? Malar, you talked about George Aveling, and I spoke about Julie Carl. We just need to make sure that other people are talking about those people who help them break the bias as well, right? So we need to get more people doing videos and putting it up on LinkedIn and sharing their stories as well. Okay, so I'm going to start with we're going to start off with talking a little bit about breaking the bias, and let's talk about bias. I think we can all agree that we're all biased, huh, Malar?
I don't know because I think so. One of those things I've been thinking about is that when we talk about break the bias, I think there seems to be an assumption for me that bias is not good, right?
No, I think bias is good. I
Yeah.
think bias keeps us safe sometimes.
So the context, I think, is really important, which is why when I was actually reflecting, when I looked at the topic and I was reflecting to connect for myself, of course, is that, I know I am biased in some areas. That's my conscious bias. And I want to stay that way in some areas. So I know I am biased in some areas and I don't want to shift. So that's where I started. And so the question I had to ask myself, because we are facilitating this topic at various spaces for this month, do I really mean it when I say break the bias, right? Number one. And also, I think the other interesting insight that I got, not just from my own reflection and the curious questions I had, but from our guest speakers that we've been talking to, right, in preparation in weeks to come, is that while break the bias is actually in line with International Women's Day's theme 2022, but breaking the bias is more generic because when we break our biases, I think we are really contributing to a more equal world that we aspire, right? And I thought, especially yesterday, that the conversation with our speaker really brought that out, because even the way the starting point or the launching can be IWD, might be women focused,
Yep.
right?
Yep. But I don't think it's limited to women, just women. Yeah, right. I think there are biases that are against men or against anything, right? It can be against, it could be gender is an obvious one. Most people, because that's what International Women's Day is about. But you have biasness against a lot of different things. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that's a good way of thinking about it, Malar, because it's not, while we are riding on the wave of International Women's Day for this month, I think we need to have a broader scope, a broader mind, a broader way of thinking about biases, not just against women or gender.
Yeah. I mean, so I think that's really interesting. But before that, I better say good morning to our dear friend Louis Morais.
Yes, Louis Morais.
Louis. I mean, to wake up at 8 o'clock and to be biased towards our show, we are very grateful. So thanks.
Yes.
Thanks for
So
coming.
that's one reason why you should remain biased.
Yes. And I would remain biased to our friendship, Louis. Now, so when we talk about bias and breaking the bias, so one of those things that I realized that the reason we begin to advocate to break the bias, that there is a why we started. And I think it's really important that in our discussions, right, or in our sessions, upcoming sessions, what I'm recognizing is, while we are thinking it's a women's agenda, but the agenda is the purpose of why we feel this is important, why it's important to break the bias, because we see some form of discrimination which impacts people, a certain group of people. We are also losing out, and the whole idea of bringing women into the workspace is actually because we bring value, and that's diversity. Right? So
Yeah.
it's not a gender thing, but it is the lost talent, the talent that was lost because of the structures that we were operating from in the past.
And also talents that may be lost because of the structures that we've put in place in order to balance out the biasness, right? Sometimes there's overuse as well, right? The way I'm thinking about it is we need to talk about biases because I think it's to help us make better decisions. I don't think we are going to make the perfect decision, right? So if you think about if I reflect around Daniel Kahneman's thinking fast and slow, his main position is that human beings don't make rational decisions, right? And obviously we don't. So coming back, so I'm looking at, how can we make better decisions? What does it mean, better decisions? Better decisions that serves that time and space. It serves that context, right? So just because we have a diversity or we are pushing towards diversity, does it mean that we have to favor one gender over the other, for example? Or like you said, is the talent the focus? Is the talent that's the right fit? That's the important thing that we need to do, right? So for me, it's making better decisions. Are we aware? Are we conscious of what are the biases we are holding? Are we ticking the boxes, or are we making better decisions for the situation, for the people around us? For me, that's where I'm thinking. Yeah.
And you rightly pointed out that I think the first thing is, and if audiences who are listening, it would really be nice to hear from you. One is, do you even think, or are you okay that you are biased, right? So because we all have our bias. If we say we don't, that's probably it's unconscious, right? And as I was thinking about the topic, I was thinking about the bits that I was unconsciously biased, and that's why I made that video, right, about George, because very often when we, especially during International Women's Day, or when we're talking about feminism, right, there's always this invisible enemy on the outside. Sometimes they are dressed up as men, dressed up as men and women, but very often that the immediate bias is that who's our enemy is the men. But as I was thinking about it, so, and I said this right in my video, that I come from a very male chauvinistic background, and interestingly, I don't see men as my enemy. I should, but I don't, because the men who've really helped, the people who have really helped me in my career, generally I can only name men. And it's not because women are enemies, but because there were men in the job, the career that I took.
The paths that you chose, right? Yeah.
And I don't. Well, I do remember some parts of discrimination, and it was not so much of discrimination because they were looking. I remember in my first job, right, when I wanted to become a trainer, and I went for this interview. The guy who was interviewing me, he said, "So why do you want to join us?" Because I was going to take a pay card and join. Right? I said, "Because I want to make a difference, and I want to train in this particular program." And he was really kind and honest, and he said, Malar, this is a man's world. I don't want you to dream, right? And of course, because he said that, and I am who I am, I said, okay, since you say I cannot, I'll just do it. All right, that's just me, right? But it was not prejudice against me, but he was caught in the belief of the world that then existed, because at that time, this was more than 20 years ago. There weren't many any female trainers in the area of personal development and motivation. Anyway, that was his reality.
Yep.
Right. And I think sometimes we don't realize that we have our unconscious biases based on those reality. Now that's that guy, that's an external reality for me that hit me, which was like brought me to consciousness. But when I was doing the video, I realized that a lot of times I set boundaries for myself because of my programming, that I can't do a lot of things because I'm female, because I'm a woman, because I'm a mother. So there's a lot of this because that I have taken on that I think I can't or I shouldn't. And that's the one I'm very focused on bringing about to my awareness, looking at it. Louis is saying, free from prejudice and favoritism, is this even possible? Of course, Louis, it's possible, because you, I, and Sharm are in this world. And Louis is saying, why should you look at men as enemies? They are best. Hey, I didn't say you guys are enemies. I said, you guys help me, right? So yeah, how many compliments do you want? So I didn't even say you guys are enemies, right? Yeah. So that's what I realized about breaking bias, and it's my internal bias that is most difficult and most dangerous in my growth.
I'm okay. That's interesting, because when you're talking about conscious and unconscious bias, right? And as you were sharing that story, I remembered an incident in my life when I was, still studying. Right? Up until then, I had no consciousness of what it was growing up as a minority, as a female in Malaysia. Until my dad told me one day, he sat me down and he said, "You know what? You are Indian. You are female in a world where these two things combine. If you don't make sure you get a good education and speak English well, you've got a hard life ahead. So, make sure you get these two things." And and just like that, and something that was not even in my horizon suddenly became a certain way of thinking, right? It was planted in my head. So till now, that's what I remember. I remember you're female, you're minority, and it's a double barrel gun facing you. So up your game. You have to be better than everybody else, right? If you want to survive in this world, if you want to stand on your own 2 feet.
Yeah, but Sharm, I mean, I grew up with a lot of that too. Not so much from my family. I think we didn't have much such intellectual conversations. There was a lot of assumptions. But I remember my political leader used to come, to the village, in the village I was growing up, and he used to say, we are Indians, and this is what will happen, right? Now, because he said that, I don't know what was his intention, but generally it sparks a lot of anger because you feel discriminated, right? But for me, it fortunately or unfortunately, it didn't spark anger. What it so I was really prepared to work very hard, because I was already told, you cannot be average or good. You need to be extraordinary. So for me, because I wasn't extraordinarily smart, and I don't speak Queen's English, but for me,
that's
the way the English is hitting, right?
That's your conscious bias,
Yes, and I've got feedback, unfortunately. I kept getting feedback about my English when I came to KL, right? And so I'm still very conscious about it. So what I realized is that I end up working really much harder. And I don't know, much harder than men or much harder than others who don't have that pressure that you really need to show up or stand out. And I see this specifically in women, right? In organizations, and we have enough statistics to say that, right? Because when you get into the job force or workforce, if you're competing for a job, there's now a bias against women, because you're going to get pregnant, you're going to get married, they bring. And I remember there was one interview with Bernie, right? She said every time she was pregnant and she went for an interview, she will say that to the interviewer, "Look, I'm pregnant. It's almost a sin to be pregnant."
Mm, mm,
right? Because
mm,
I'm
mm,
going to take time off from work. So there's a lot of assumptions that work against women,
mm,
right?
mm. There's and sometimes it's systemic, right? So let me give you an example. In Singapore, education is heavily subsidized, right?
Mm.
Right up to university. And so some of the things that so because it's subsidized, the government has much say in who goes into what faculty, right? So if you take the faculty of medicine, which is very expensive to put a student through, there has been or was, I don't know whether it's still existing, but for many years, biasness against women doing medicine or girls doing medicine because of the assumption that you get married, you get pregnant, and then you might drop being a doctor, or you might end up being a GP, which therefore means what is the government subsidizing you for? We want you to become doctors and improve on the field, right? So yeah, so sometimes with that kind of thinking, we build systemic systems that maybe not that carry on for years, yeah, and people don't we don't question it. So what I'm hearing, Malar, as we're talking about there's unconscious bias, there's conscious bias, right?
That's internal
Bias
and that's external.
external, yep, there's internal bias, all right, and then there's external bias as well, right? And Lewis is saying things that happen to women think for a while. Okay, very zen, that one. Okay.
I don't know whether it's
Um,
then or not, but I want to respond to him to say, I
I
don't
know you
think,
want to.
I know. It's not that things happen to women, right? As things happen
Mhm.
to women, things also happen to men,
Yeah, and I think
right?
sometimes we don't think about it that way, right? And
Yeah.
and in a world where there's male and female, let's just make it simple, right? Male and female. If one is feeling disenfranchised, the enemy is automatically the others, right? I mean, that's kind of how people think about things, like very black and white kind of a thing. Yeah, but I think
Yeah.
sometimes the enemy is ourselves as well, lah.
True, true. And I think, Louis, the idea of talking about this is when
Mm,
we start thinking about being unbiased, even though the subject matter might be women, but
mm,
you when you work on being unbiased on the systems and prejudices against women, what it also does is that it works on the system and prejudices against men, right?
mm,
Because
mm,
when you are helping a woman to bring out a talent, right, what you're doing is the men have been holding a lot of responsibility on their shoulders, specifically as breadwinners for centuries. Not that they had a choice, right? There are many men who want to be home with their children, do less work externally and be home, right?
mm.
Communities never gave them permission. So, in the pandemic, if a woman loses a job and a man loses a job, the community is a lot more harsher on a man
On
who
the
is
man losing the job.
right.
Mm,
So when we begin to take away this biasness against human called women, we actually create a more equal equity world for all human, right? And that's what we're trying to do. Is it's what we're focused on and how it actually balances up the system. Sorry, Luis, I
mm.
had to say it to you. Okay.
No, I think it's fine. Yeah. So you brought up the next part, next layer, right? Which is for and against, right? So
Mm.
sometimes these biases work. I mean, when we think the word bias, we almost automatically think it's against. Yeah, it's against something. It's against men. It's against what's right. It's against what's wrong, right? So yet at the same time, we need to also see the flip side, right? Which is that sometimes biases are for.
Mm.
Yeah, you're biased for something. Like for example, last month we heard from Adi, who's biased for self care and well being, right?
Mm.
It was biased for self-care and well-being for himself as he went up the corporate ladder, and he's also still for self-care and well-being, right? And that realization, that self-awareness, was important for him. Why? Because it helped him make certain decisions. Okay, he helped him do certain things, right? So I think it's for and against. I think we need to also consider that aspect of not just against or
Yeah,
see it as a negative thing. Yeah.
and I think that's why the conversation is very important, because while we're starting with being break the bias and break the bias, just talking about the why or the what and the when and where and who, as we're talking about it, it's bringing us to back to basic, which is the purpose, why we're doing what we're doing. Are we doing this as an event, or on the 8th of March for the sake of talking about it and shouting it loud? Or are we now beginning to, because things are better, we are re-looking at a lot of systems in place, and we are now looking at context. Like, for example, in Malaysia, right? I think a couple of years ago, pre-pandemic, everywhere you go on International Women's Day, it's about getting 30% of women on the board.
On the board, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Now,
yeah.
which is a bias that was required because women were not willing to take on leadership. Now, why women were not willing to take on leadership? It's not because of the capability, right? Number one is women have higher expectations of themselves, right? And there's this study over and over again where they say, when a man and a woman apply for a job, if a man has got 6/10 ticks in the box, he will just apply. And he's confident. Now, why? Because he has a lot of experience being confident in that space. With 6/10, he's always done well. Whereas for the women, if you really think about it, right, when, in the society and communities that we grow up, right, when your child doesn't turn out well, they don't ever say, don't tell, it's the father's problem, right? It's always, he didn't do her job. And so we take it personally, even as career women, right? If your child, comes back with, when the teacher says, your child didn't finish the homework or your child misbehaved, the first thing, nobody has to tell us, right? The first thing mothers do is that, oh my gosh, I have failed, right? Career women say, oh, I have failed, number one. Number two, I have failed because I focused on my career. And then there's always noise around you that tells you you have failed because you're focused on your career. You're not good enough as a mother. But we never say that to fathers. Neither do fathers say that to themselves, right? So we put a lot of pressure on ourselves. Now, when we coach, the women, right, we experience this. But what we now need to do is that we want women to contribute, in the nation building, but we also need to support the women, right, in these areas, right? And and you can't say, okay, now we just get you 30%. So it's not about, why women are reluctant to take on the 30%. It's not because of incapability, because we are special, because we are made that way to think through the consequences on the people who are dependent on us. All right, we take our commitment very, very seriously. So this is why you don't see many single mothers abandoning their children, right?
Yeah.
Because,
so what so I think we can agree that just making, putting a box that says that you have to have 30% of, certain kind of representation, or in this case, women represented in leadership in the board, right, for diversity, is not enough if we're not looking at the context, or we're not looking at the systems around it that support. That support us doing that, or not seeing that this machine is a little different from the other machine that's working together in that system, right? It's part of the system, but the cogs look different, right? This cog needs something different, and this cog. So if you put that cog in the system expecting it to work similarly, not going to work, right? Or it'll work for a while. After some time, it will, blast in your face, right? Yeah.
And we also
So,
need to, sorry.
sorry, yeah. We also need
We
to.
also need to make sure, even if we start off with the so-called 30% and push women up, we need to make sure we put the right women so that the 30% who get there, or whatever percentage that's there, they become successful for other women to now say, now I know how that can be done, right?
Yeah.
Because we need best practices. We know how women are balancing, how women are managing. Because I need to be able to see other women doing it. Because if I put 30% of whatever percentage I put up there,
just
and
because I need to put the 30%.
now, as a woman, I'm not going to feel good because I got in there because of my gender, number one, right? Number two, if I'm not doing well, I am sending a message to all the other women who might be more capable, right? Can do that. That look here, this is a very difficult spot for you. I can't do it. I don't think you can do it, right? So it's going to take a longer time for us to get to that space where we have more diversity and bringing in the right talent. Which is why I think now we are asking that question. We've moved from the numbers to from quantity to quality.
Yeah. So how can we? So I think then the quantity. If you get from quantity to quality, that's where unbiasedness comes in, right? That's where we need to know how is it that we can get a little bit more unbiased, all right, or less biased, all right, when we're making some of these decisions, right? And
bias appropriately.
Being biased appropriately is suitable to the situation or the role that you're holding, right? Yeah. So let's try to understand what this unbiased means, right? Let's have a definition around it. I think it's a lot easier to have a discussion when we know, what's that scope of being unbiased is. And I think we have a video for that. Ayo.
Why?
I mean, I look at the definition, right? And I go, oh my God, if I have to do that every time I've got my bias, I am conscious of my bias and have to be, unbiased, right? That's a bit of that's hard work, yeah. Being unbiased.
Actually, I like the context, but let's do the context, right? So when we talk about unbiased, and we're taking our definition from Flow, because being unbiased leads to resilience, which is what we're going to talk about shortly, right? Because what is being unbiased all about? It's about leading us towards, it's a dimension that helps us to be more resilient. So if you look at the definition of unbiased, there's a logical side, there's an emotional side. And very often, the emotional side is actually seen as a negative thing.
Correct.
Right? And women are often associated to be emotional because we're expressive, right? Yeah? Because we show our emotions, right? And because we have permission, right? Now, if we look at the definition, it says take the emotion out. Now, when we talk about emotion out, it's talking about take the emotions that impact your calmness. Right? Now, what affects our calmness? When we are stressed, right? When we are stressed, we experience anxiety and fear. And we know the anxiety and fear in our emotional brain, which is known also as emotional hijacking, takes away our ability to think well. Now, so what unbiased actually means is really, if you think about it in this definition, how do you return back to the state of calmness? And for you to return to the state of calmness, now why you want to return to state of calmness? So that you can think well, right? You can process objectively. It doesn't mean you don't feel, but we are driven by anxiety and fear. When we are driven by anxiety and fear, we don't feel safe. When we don't feel safe, we are making choices based on our past programming that is not well thought of. So it's not totally taking away emotions, yeah?
Yeah. Okay, so I want to shift it a bit, right? So I want to go on the past programming, and you're right. We make decisions based on past programming, right? And sometimes that past programming is not so much, the emotions is not so much anxiety and fear. The emotions could be preference, right? So for example, if I'm making a decision and it's a choice between two options, right? And I have a preference for one option. I'm biased towards that one option, right? Whether that option is it's a human or a thing, right? I'm biased towards it. So here, my emotions here is not the anxiety, the stress. Would that be right? Right.
So sorry. But
Right.
the idea that we are talking about preference, right? So if I'm talking to somebody and they say, yeah, I prefer this, and I think preference is very good. But the question is not, one is being aware of your preference. Number two is knowing your preference, whether your preference is automated because this is how it was done anyway, or because it puts me in a space where I don't have to deal with my internal conflicts. Right? So again, the motivation for preference here is that, I prefer this to that because, some will say I prefer dealing with women, for example, than men because, women don't put up a strong fight, for example, or vice versa. Yeah. Or
I do the other way around.
Exactly. Yeah. So that information that you're dealing with, the preference or the belief that you're operating from has a past basis. We're not checking for relevance. So what we are doing with objectivity is, or being unbiased, is we are now, the moment we are conscious about our bias, we are now asking, what is the context? What is the relevance? Is it still true today? And connecting it back to purpose. And I think that is the ability of and why we need to talk about being unbiased. So the preference already tells you it's automated from the past. So we're not
correct.
Yeah.
You're not thinking, it's auto reflex kind of thing, right? And that was what Adi also spoke about last week. I mean, he had an auto reflex towards self-care and well-being. And so he was aware of it. His preference was that he was aware of his preference. And because of that, he chose to go and work with partners who had a preference for the business, the hard numbers and stuff like that, right? And that balanced it up. The decisions then became more balanced and more unbiased when he had to make those decisions. So awareness is self-awareness is, I think, key here.
Sharma has a question,
She has
Yeah, I think, she's making both a question and a statement. She says, doesn't that again mean being satisfied with 610 but aiming for perfection when you say have the right 30%?
Okay. What do you mean by right?
Right, 30%, yeah. So Sharma, thanks for that. So I'm not too sure whether I'm answering or I'm going to just respond to this, right? I think doesn't that mean again being satisfied? So I think the tick in the box, we are looking at how men operate in terms of confidence and how women operate in terms of confidence. We need to tick all the 10 boxes that have been given to us. The 10 boxes may not necessarily be essential in carrying out the job, right? But aiming for perfection when you say you have the right 30%. When we talk about the right percentage of specifically women in whatever we want to do, the right actually means that this is a space for us to bring out our talents and live our best lives. And we need to be given the fair opportunity to do that, right? Don't create biases and make it difficult for me to live my best life in the spaces I want to express myself is what I'm saying. When it comes to 6/10, like when we talk about specifically women, right? So if men can do it with 6/10, why are women reluctant to, if they have 6/10, to apply for the job, I think is the question. And that's something that we need to work with ourselves, right? So I'm just going to quote one research that I read about self-esteem. All right. They did a study between working career women and homemakers. All right. And they measured self esteem. All right. Now, who do you think had greater self esteem, Shah?
Okay, you asked the wrong person. Probably the homemakers.
Exactly, right? But
Mm,
yeah, now why? Because career women had all the things that they saw homemakers doing for their children and the family.
mm,
Plus, they added on more ticks about what they need to do at the job.
mm,
This is the superwoman syndrome, right?
mm,
And so, which means that career women are never going to tick all the box because they keep increasing the number of ticks, right? So it was very interesting because when you speak to homemakers, they think career women self-esteem is greater, right? But in a
mm,
study, what they found is that career women self-esteem is much lower because they're looking at the number of ticks that's not ticked. All right, and
mm,
they don't compare the number of boxes they actually have, right? And so these are things that we need to bring in context to, which then takes us to the idea of programming.
mm,
Right?
mm.
And in
Yep.
our study of resilience, right? So, I did say that in being unbiased, and being unbiased leads us to being more resilient. Now, why more resilient? For us to be resilient, there's an adversity, right? When we have adversity means what? It's a surprise. You don't know what to do. It's a new situation. And when you
Yeah,
have
to like 2 years ago. Yeah.
yeah,
Mm.
when you have an adversity, there are two or three things that need to happen. Right? One is
Mm,
you acquire greater skills to overcome it, to jump over and. But
mm,
resilience also means you don't know what to do. You need to survive through it, right?
mm,
Now, for us
mm,
to do both, what Karen Wavich found in her study of 30 years of people from all over the world is that the number one obstacle, all right, and I'm sure Kirtana will put up the quote now. The number one obstacle for us to be resilient is the way we think. Because we
mm,
cannot solve the problems that we have, which is unresolved, at the same level of thinking it was created. We need to think differently. So, our thinking style is what causes us to respond emotionally to events. So, it's our thinking style that determines our resilience, i.e., our ability to overcome, steer through bounds when
mm.
adversity strike backs. And that's why being unbiased becomes important, right? Because we need a different way of thinking.
Way of
Now, this
thinking. Yeah.
and
Mm,
this also brings us back to Martin Seligman's work, right? Because we think about our programming and how we've been programmed. And this programming leads us to feeling helpless or hopeless. I
mm.
can't be that person. I can't tick the 20 boxes that the world is expecting of me and I'm expecting of myself, right?
Or,
Hmm.
or I keep going around the hamster wheel, right? Because I just keep on doing it, right? It's a little bit like Boxer in Animal Farm. So there's this character, right? And this horse, I'll just keep on doing it because I'll just do it, and things will get better. Things will get better. And when things get better, I will get better, right? But the same thing over and over again. Yep.
Yeah. So in the study of helplessness, and they did the study, putting up some dogs, and what they did is that they had two sets, right? And I'm sure Kirtana is
Mm,
going to put up the slide right now. As she puts up the slide now, what they did is they look at these dogs, and so if you look at the dog, there's that barrier, then there's the shock, right? There's the shock and there's no shock. So when the dog is shocked, so there's one part of the dog, where it's shocked. So when it gets shocked, it moves forward. Shock moves forward. Eventually, they actually took out the barrier, but the
mm,
dog was not willing to try.
mm,
All right. Now, this has got a lot to do with our background conditioning and our background thinking, not limited to women. All of us who have grown up with what we cannot do, where we are taught to believe that we are helpless. So if you come from a background where you have been grounded in helplessness, why you can't do a lot of things, even when the opportunities are there, because you have not checked your past programming for relevance, you will become helpless and you will act helpless. You don't believe in yourself. You get caught in your limited self thinking and say, I don't think I can hack this, right? Which will then lead us to thinking whether we are hopeful or helpless, right?
Mm.
And,
Mm.
Kirtana puts up the slide of being hopeful and helpless. So, International Women's Day, Break the Bias, I think the question for us to think whether we are whoever we are, right? We need to ask ourselves, right, whenever it comes to our bias that we are conscious about, right? Is this bias giving us hope, or is it
Mm.
making us helpless?
Helpless.
Because
Mm.
helplessness will lead us to take us away from our resilience. Whereas when we are
Mm.
hopeful, right, we become actually more resilient. We acquire skills to be resilient. Yes, Sham.
This is, yeah. So this is like, am I seeing possibilities, or am I feeling kind of stuck? I don't know what to do. Would that be
Exactly.
right? Yeah, yeah, right. So am I seeing, okay, yeah, I know it's difficult, but I think let's see how what can I do, versus nothing's going to work, so I'm stuck. I don't know how to think about this, right?
Yep.
I go down a rabbit hole.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
And which is why I think we're bringing in great speakers in the next couple of weeks. So today we wanted to basically
Hmm.
and talk about why breaking the bias is important for all of
Yep.
us, right? It
Yep.
is for the human nation, even though it's being launched for IWD 2022. We need to start
Mm.
having better, deeper conversations. And we want to look at practical approaches, right? There are leaders in the corporate world who have already cleared the path and walked ahead, and how they have broken the bias and how are they putting in structures at workplaces to make this work. And we're bringing
Mm.
some of these speakers in the next couple of weeks,
Not
isn't it?
just putting in structures. I think what's been amazing is understanding their thinking, right? As we listen to them, right? How they've thought about it, how they're thinking about it, what are they grappling with in their heads and their experiences behind it. I think that in itself is a story that's worth sharing, I think, in the next few weeks. So we've got a minute to go before we end our session today. Yeah, so the next 4 weeks, we have got a very interesting line of speakers lined up, and we start off with next week with Deepa, right? You want to tell a little bit about Deepa, Malar?
Oh yeah, well, Deepa is a personal friend actually, an amazing lady whom I really admire, and she said yes, and she actually is a VP with Bursa Malaysia.
Bursa. Okay,
Yes.
and the following week we have Danish Rahman, who is leading Danone, as in the pharmaceutical company, not sorry, pharmaceutical, FMCG company in Thailand. And we had a chat with him yesterday. I think you're going to be totally blown away with how he thinks about biasness, right? And we've got more lined up. I'm not telling you now because we would just want to keep it a secret. In the meantime, if you want to catch up with our previous episodes, you can always do that through our YouTube channels, both at Be in Clarity as well as Hearts and Mind. And Malar has she thought of this idea that's very, very generous. She's putting up a 2-hour session. She's putting up a 2-hour session, which we're going to explore how we can get ourselves untrapped with our thinking, or what are the thinking traps that keep us in this space of biasness, or doesn't help us think unbiasedly, right? We'll put some details up when we on LinkedIn soon. But yeah, if you know
Yeah.
anyone who's going to join us for it, yeah, come
Yeah.
pass
So
it
put
on.
your name in saying if you're interested in attending our 2-hour complimentary workshop for IWD 2022 as to how, the tools to be unbiased. Okay, tools to be unbiased. It's a 2-hour virtual workshop that we're going to run. Put your name here, say you're interested, tag people whom you think we should invite or who might be interested, so that we can
reach out to us on LinkedIn. Yeah, reach out to us on LinkedIn as well.
Yeah,
let us know.
do that, and remember to subscribe to our YouTube
channel
for a couple of reasons. One is to catch up with these episodes, but we're also bringing you a lot of podcasts and different topics, so you can actually go back to the old topics that are relevant to you, and choose what you want to listen to if you think there's value in it. All right, I am done, Shah.
Yeah, and we are done for today, for the start of Break the Bias in March. You know where to find us next week. Look out for the link. Same time, not same place, slightly different place, StreamYard, but different link. And we'll see you next Thursday at 8 o'clock sharp, Singapore time and Malaysia time. Bye from Singapore.
Happy Women's Day, and let's do everything we can to break the bias. See you next week. Bye.